Some seeds planted in the desert take decades to germinate, and when they finally sprout, they transform the entire surrounding landscape. The afternoon sun shed its golden light over the arid lands of Arizona as Thomas Mitchell guided his horse through the rocky canyons. The wind carried the dry smell of mugwort and the distant echo of his own breath. He had spent the morning checking the cattle scattered in the pastures farthest from his small ranch, a routine he had known for more than 20 years in those inhospitable lands. Thomas always preferred the solitude of those territories. The vastness of the desert offered a peace that cities had never been able to provide. Every rock, every cactus, every shadow cast by the rock formations told a silent story that he learned to read over the years. He was a man who found comfort in the simplicity of rural life, far from the complications that other men seemed to seek. The sound of his mount echoed softly among the rocks when something unusual caught his eye. A patch of color that did not belong to that monotonous landscape. Thomas pulled the reins and got off his horse carefully, approaching what appeared to be a small body lying between the rocks. His experienced eyes immediately recognized the traditional Apache costumes, but it was the delicate size of the figure that made him quicken his pace. She was a girl. She couldn't be more than 10 years old. His dark hair was tangled with dust and small sticks, and a wound on his left leg had left marks of dried blood on the surrounding earth. She breathed irregularly, clearly dehydrated and exhausted. Thomas knelt beside her, carefully checking her vital signs. The child was unconscious, but still alive. Thomas looked around, looking for signs of other Apaches or any hint of what might have happened. There were no tracks of horses, no marks of struggle. The girl seemed to have walked alone for a considerable distance before collapsing there. His clothes were torn in places, suggesting that he had been moving through the thorny vegetation for some time. Without hesitation, Thomas removed his own shirt and tore it into strips to make makeshift bandages. He carefully cleaned the girl's wound with water from his canteen and bandaged her leg gently. She mumbled something in Apache during the process, but remained unconscious. Thomas recognized a few words from the native language as he had learned the basics during his years in those lands, occasionally interacting with peaceful groups passing through the region. Carrying the girl to her horse required special care. Thomas held her tightly, but tried not to aggravate her injuries. She was surprisingly light, and that only added to her concern about how long she had been without adequate food or water. During the trip back to the ranch, he maintained a slow and steady pace, constantly checking that she continued to breathe steadily. Thomas's ranch was modest but well organized. A main wooden house, a barn, some corrals, and a small vegetable garden that he maintained with water from an artesian well. It was a place designed for functionality, not to impress visitors. Upon arriving, he took the girl directly to his own room, carefully placing her on the bed and covering her with clean blankets. For the next few hours, Thomas worked as a dedicated nurse. He prepared nutritious broths, changed the wound dressings, and kept moist compresses on the girl's forehead to lower the fever that had begun. He knew that the recovery would be gradual, and that he would need patience. In between medical care, Thomas found himself observing the child's serene face, wondering about his family and the circumstances that had brought him there. The girl woke up for the first time in the early hours of the second day. His dark eyes slowly opened, revealing a natural intelligence that impressed Thomas. She didn't scream or show panic. She just watched him silently, as if assessing his intentions. Thomas moved slowly, showing his empty hands and offering her water in small sips. She drank greedily but kept her eyes fixed on him the whole time. In the days that followed, a peculiar routine was established between the two. Thomas continued to take care of his chores at the ranch during the day, but he always returned to check on the girl's condition. She began to eat the food he prepared and allowed him to change his bandages without resistance. There was a quiet trust growing between them, built through small gestures of care and mutual respect. Thomas realized that the girl understood more English than she had initially thought. She responded to his simple instructions and seemed to recognize when he explained what he was doing. During the evenings, when he sat in the chair next to the bed to make sure she was okay, Thomas would sometimes talk softly about the ranch, about the animals, about the land. I didn't expect answers, but I felt that she was listening and processing every word. The leg wound healed well for the first 2 weeks, and soon the girl was walking around the house carefully. Thomas noticed that she watched everything carefully, how he cooked, how he took care of the horses, how he organized his tools. She was a naturally curious child, and he began to include her in small daily tasks, teaching her through practical demonstrations. Time in the desert teaches that every farewell carries within it the promise of a return, even when hearts cannot see it. One morning, 3 weeks after finding the girl, Thomas woke up to the sound of voices outside his home. They were Apache voices, speaking in a low but determined tone. He dressed quickly and went out to find 5 warriors mounted, their horses restless in the morning sun. The leader of the group, a middle-aged man with ritual scars on his face, got off his mount and walked toward Thomas with measured steps. The girl appeared at the door of the house at that moment, and Thomas could see the immediate recognition in her eyes. She ran toward the group, and the leader embraced her with a mixture of relief and concern that needed no translation. It was clearly her father, and the other men were members of her tribe who had spent weeks looking for her. Thomas watched the meeting in silence, realizing that this moment marked the end of a unique period in his life. The Apache leader approached Thomas and, in slow but clear English, expressed his gratitude for the care given to his daughter. He explained that the girl had gotten lost during a sandstorm as the tribe moved into new hunting grounds. She had tried to follow the group alone, but became completely disoriented. Without Thomas's care, he would surely have perished in the unforgiving wilderness. Thomas nodded in acknowledgement, but his words were few. He was always a man of actions, not of grand speeches. He went into the house and brought some supplies, fresh water, dried meat, and basic medicines that might be useful during the return trip. The gesture was greeted with silent approval by the warriors, who recognized in him someone who understood the necessities of a journey through the desert. The girl approached Thomas one last time. She held his large, calloused hands with her small hands, looking straight into his eyes. There were no words between them, but Thomas felt that she was trying to communicate something important. It was as if he were making a silent promise, etching in his memory every detail of that moment. He knelt down to stand at her height and gently touched her forehead, a gesture that had become customary during the weeks of care. Before leaving, the Apache leader took out of his bag a small amulet made of turquoise and silver, offering it to Thomas as a token of gratitude and respect. Thomas accepted the gift with reverence, understanding the profound meaning of that gesture. Among the Apache, such an offering represented not only gratitude, but also the establishment of a permanent bond between the families involved. Thomas watched the group walk away, the girl looking back several times until they became just dots on the horizon. The silence that followed seemed deeper than any stillness he had experienced before. The house, which for weeks had echoed with the child's small footsteps, now returned to its familiar solitude, but in some different way. Over the next few days, Thomas found himself frequently touching the Apache amulet he now carried in his pocket. During his daily tasks, he found himself looking in the direction in which the group had disappeared, as if waiting to see them return. The ranch routine continued, but something had changed irrevocably in his outlook on life and on himself. The room where the girl had recovered remained untouched for many days. Thomas would come in occasionally, tidying up blankets that were already neatly arranged or checking to see if he had forgotten anything. It was his way of processing the experience and keeping the memory of those extraordinary weeks alive. He had discovered a capacity for care that he did not know he possessed. The seasons passed, and Thomas completely resumed his former life. He took care of the cattle, maintained the ranch, negotiated with merchants who passed through the region, but he often found himself telling stories about the Apache girl to the few visitors who stopped by his property. These narratives always began reluctantly and ended with a special twinkle in the lonely farmer's eye. During the harshest winters, when work on the ranch dwindled, Thomas would sometimes ride to the spot where he had found the girl. There was no practical reason for these visits, but something drew him back to that place. He sat among the rocks, watching the horizon and remembering the details of that day that changed his life so unexpectedly. The years passed, one after the other, marked by the natural changes that time brings. Thomas gradually aged. His sun-darkened hair turned grey. His hands became rougher, but his memory of the Apache girl remained crystal clear. He never married, never formed a traditional family, but he carried with him the certainty that he had participated in something important and significant. Traders and travelers occasionally brought news about movements of Apache tribes in the region. Thomas listened to this information with disguised interest, always hoping to hear something that might be related to the girl he had taken care of. Sometimes news reports mentioned a young leader emerging among the Apache, someone known for her wisdom and courage. But Thomas was never able to confirm whether these stories had any connection to his little guest. The Apache amulet never left his pocket. It has become part of their identity, a constant reminder that sometimes the simplest gestures can create bonds that transcend cultures, languages, and time itself. Thomas developed the habit of touching it whenever he made important decisions, as if seeking guidance from the ancestral wisdom that the object represented. A decade had passed since the farewell, and Thomas began to accept that he would probably never see the Apache girl again. Life on the ranch continued its predictable cadence, and he found a different peace in that acceptance. I had learned that some experiences are complete in themselves, not needing continuations or reunions to maintain their value and meaning. 20 years can turn a child into a leader, but they cannot erase the footprints left in the soul by an act of kindness. The autumn of 1892 brought unexpected changes to the Badlands of Arizona. Thomas Mitchell, now 63, watched the transformations around him with the patience of someone who had learned to accept the natural rhythm of things. Her hair was completely white, her posture slightly bent by the weight of the years, but her eyes kept the same clarity as always. The ranch had prospered modestly, and he had become a respected figure among the few neighbors in the area. News coming in through traders spoke of growing tensions between the colonists and the native tribes. The government was implementing stricter policies, forcing many Apache groups to settle on distant reservations. Thomas listened to this information with growing concern, often remembering the girl he had cared for 2 decades earlier. He wondered if she was safe, if she had managed to build a happy life among her people. During a particularly hot afternoon, Thomas was repairing a fence when he spotted a cloud of dust approaching from the main path. It was unusual to receive visitors at that time of year, and something about the way the dust rose suggested a large group of horsemen. He put down his tools and walked toward the house, his instincts sharpened by the experience of decades living in those uncertain lands. What emerged from the dust was not what Thomas had expected. A group of approximately 20 Apache warriors approached in organized formation, their horses maintaining a steady and disciplined pace. At the head of the group, mounted on a beautiful pinto horse, was riding a woman. Even from a distance, Thomas could see that she commanded the group with natural authority, her upright and confident posture contrasting with the respectful caution of the men who followed her. As the group approached, Thomas sensed something familiar in the figure of the leader. There was something about her movements, the way she held the reins, that sparked long dormant memories. When they finally stopped in front of her property, the woman got off her horse with flowing grace and removed the handkerchief that had protected her face from the dust of the journey. Thomas felt his heart racing when he recognized the dark, intelligent eyes he had gazed at for so many nights 20 years before. It was her. The Apache girl had returned, now a woman of 30, clearly a respected leader among her people. Her traditional clothes were richly decorated, indicating high position within the tribe, and she carried herself with the dignity of someone accustomed to making important decisions. But when her eyes met Thomas's, something in her expression softened, revealing to the child that he had known for a few precious weeks. The woman approached slowly, her steps measured and respectful. Thomas stood still, almost in disbelief of what he was seeing. She stopped before him, and for a long moment they both just watched each other in silence. It was as if time had stopped, allowing two souls to recognize each other through the changes that the years had brought. Thomas noticed that she was still limping slightly from her left leg, a subtle reminder of the wound he had cared for so thoroughly. Wordless, the woman reached out and showed Thomas a small object that he recognized immediately. It was a piece of the shirt he had torn to make the first bandages on his wound. She had kept that fragment of fabric for 20 years, carrying it as a talisman that connected her to those days of care and safety. Thomas touched his own pocket, feeling the Apache amulet his father had given him so many years before. The group's presence was no coincidence. Thomas noticed that the other warriors watched the interaction with respect, but also with an underlying tension that suggested that this visit had purposes that went beyond a simple reunion. The region was changing rapidly, and Apache tribes were being pressured to make difficult decisions about their future. The presence of such a young and determined leader indicated that significant changes were taking place within the tribal structure. Thomas gestured toward his home, inviting the group to rest and refresh after the long drive. The Apache leader waved thanks and translated the invitation to her companions. Thomas rushed to prepare fresh water and what he had of food, his movements gaining an energy he hadn't felt in years. It was as if her presence had awakened a vitality he thought he had lost forever. As the party rested in the shade of the oak trees near the house, Thomas had the opportunity to observe in more detail the woman the girl had become. She interacted with her warriors with a mixture of authority and maternal affection, clearly concerned for the well-being of each of them. Their decisions were made quickly, but always after considering different perspectives. It was obvious that she had become an exceptional leader. During the next few hours, silent communication was established between Thomas and the Apache leader. She would walk around the ranch, noting the improvements he had made over the years, occasionally touching objects that seemed to stir up specific memories. Thomas followed her at a respectful distance, allowing her to explore freely, but remaining available should she need anything. As the sun began to set, the woman approached Thomas again. This time she spoke, and her voice had the musical cadence he remembered, only more mature and confident. She spoke Apache first, then switched to clear, well-articulated English. He explained that he had become the leader of a confederation of Apache groups that resisted government pressures to move to distant reservations. His position was unique in that it combined traditional respect for his lineage with negotiation skills he had developed through years of interacting with different cultures. The reason for his visit gradually became clear. The tribes were facing unprecedented pressures, and she had come to seek wisdom and perhaps help from someone she knew who understood both the importance of the land and the value of compassion between different peoples. Thomas represented a bridge between two worlds, and she needed that kind of perspective to navigate the difficult decisions that lay ahead. The seeds planted by kindness bloom in gardens we never imagined, and their fruits feed future generations with hope. Night descended gently over the ranch, bringing with it a conversation that would change the fate of many lives. Thomas and the Apache leader, whom he now knew to call himself Ayana, sat on the porch of their home, while the warriors rested respectfully near the barn. The stars shone with particular intensity that night, as if the sky itself testified to the importance of that moment. Ayana began to tell her story in the quiet voice of someone who had learned to carry great responsibilities. After returning to her tribe 20 years earlier, she had grown up with a unique perspective on the world of white settlers. The experience of being cared for by Thomas had planted in her heart the understanding that kindness could exist between people of different cultures. This wisdom had distinguished her from a young age, leading her to be consulted by the elders on increasingly important matters. By the time government pressures intensified, forcing several Apache tribes to consider moving to distant reservations, Ayana had emerged as a leading voice. It proposed a different approach, negotiating specific territories where tribes could maintain their traditions while peacefully coexisting with settled settlers. Her vision was ambitious, but she had managed to unite 5 different Apache groups under a confederation based on this philosophy. Thomas listened in silence, admiring the wisdom and courage of the woman the girl had become. She explained that she had come to him because she needed a reliable mediator, someone who knew both the needs of local farmers and the values of native tribes. Government officials had agreed to consider his proposal, but only if it could show support from respected settlers in the region. The proposal was complex but elegant. Ayana had identified an area of land that had traditionally not been suitable for large-scale agriculture, but which offered sufficient resources for Apache subsistence. In exchange for permanent rights to this area, the Confederate tribes would offer protection for the smaller ranches from the rogue bandits and traders who often plagued the region. They would also share knowledge about navigating the desert and locating water sources. Thomas immediately recognized the genius of the proposal. It not only offered a practical solution to territorial conflict, but created a basis for genuine cooperation between 2 cultures that had been forced into antagonism by government policies. Ayana's plan transformed cultural diversity from a problem into a strategic advantage for the entire region. For the next few hours, Thomas and Ayana worked on the practical details of the proposal. She had brought detailed maps and had already talked informally with some farmers in the region. Thomas knew many of the local landowners personally and could gauge which ones would be most receptive to the idea. Together, they identified the most compelling arguments and concerns that would need to be addressed. Thomas felt an energy he hadn't experienced in decades. Ayana's project offered her the opportunity to contribute to something much bigger than the maintenance of her own ranch. It was a chance to use his reputation and relationships to create a legacy of peace and cooperation. He immediately accepted the role of mediator, knowing that he was embarking on the most important mission of his life. Over the next few weeks, Thomas worked tirelessly to present the proposal to farmers in the area. His reputation as an honest and practical man helped a lot in the initial acceptance of the idea. Many of the landowners were already facing problems with security and water scarcity, and the prospect of having allies who knew the desert was appealing. The meetings were long and sometimes tense, but gradually a favorable consensus began to emerge. Ayana returned regularly to the ranch during this time, always accompanied by small groups of her warriors. These visits allowed Thomas to closely observe his leadership in action. She negotiated with infinite patience, always looking for solutions that would benefit all parties involved. His ability to find common ground between seemingly irreconcilable perspectives was remarkable. The turning point came when a representative of the territorial government visited the region to formally evaluate the proposal. Thomas organized a meeting at the community center in the nearest town, where farmers, tribal leaders, and the officer were able to meet on neutral ground. Ayana presented her plan with impressive eloquence, speaking in both English and Apache as needed. Approval was not immediate, but the seeds of change had been planted. The official promised to take the proposal to higher levels of government for consideration, and local farmers signed a petition of support. Thomas felt deep satisfaction in seeing how his small contribution had helped create something much greater than he himself could have imagined. Months later, when official approval finally arrived, Thomas was present at the ceremony that officially established the territory of the Apache Confederacy of Guyana. The celebration was modest but meaningful, marking not only the end of a conflict, but the beginning of a new form of relationship between different cultures. In the years that followed, the agreement proved to be even more successful than optimists had anticipated. The region prospered through cooperation, with farmers and tribes sharing resources and knowledge. Thomas became a respected figure in both communities, often consulted when minor misunderstandings arose that needed mediation. Guyana visited regularly, and Thomas watched with pride as she continued to grow as a leader. She eventually established educational programs that taught young people from both cultures about sustainable desert farming and survival techniques. His vision had expanded far beyond simple coexistence to true cultural integration. When Thomas turned 70, Guyana organized a special ceremony in his honor. Representatives from all communities in the region participated, celebrating not only his age, but his contribution to local peace and prosperity. During the ceremony, Guyana presented Thomas with a ceremonial Apache headdress, an honor rarely bestowed on anyone outside the tribe. Thomas lived his final years surrounded by the respect and affection of two communities he had helped unite. When he finally left, at the age of 82, his funeral was attended by hundreds of people from different cultures, all united by gratitude for a man who had demonstrated that individual kindness can truly change the world. Guyana preserved Thomas's ranch as a memorial, turning it into a training center for young leaders from both cultures. The place where it had all begun 20 years earlier has become an enduring symbol of hope and cooperation. The small seed of goodness planted in the desert had become a forest of possibilities for future generations. If this story touched your heart, please leave your like to support more inspiring narratives of the Wild West. Share this video with someone who believes in the power of human kindness. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any of our exciting stories. Tell us in the comments which part of the story marked you the most. Your participation motivates us to continue bringing these life lessons through the adventures of the Western.